looking forward to this war. It's with great trepidation because it all could have been avoided, all of it, if we just had an army, honestly, that was not infected with regressive, as you say. I'll use your word for it. Regressive ideology. That's the problem, and that's why when the day after comes, the army, from top to bottom, has to be purged. And the one document that has to be torn up and thrown in a bonfire is the so-called purity of arms, which is not a Jewish document.
The code of ethics, so-called.
The so-called code of ethics.
Authored by one Professor Asa Kasher.
Correct.
Who is, in my estimation, one of the most perverse individuals that one could possibly imagine. The man claims to be dati, that is to say, religious.
Oh,
most of the time, almost all of the time, he does not wear a kippah. I don't know what else he does in his private life. I happen to know someone very well who is familiar with the family, but I don't know what he does on a daily basis. I don't really care to know either. But
no, you wouldn't want to know.
But I do know about, I am familiar with his public announcements and pronouncements over the years. And in the, I don't remember exactly what year that document, the so-called ethical code of the Israeli army was authored. I think it was the early 90s, perhaps.
Yeah, that's when I first heard about it.
The aim of that document is simply to it's of course based on an early iteration of regressive woke ideology, the aim of which is to cause the army to be as effeminate, as passive, as
possible,
as non-combative as possible.
Correct.
And the ultimate goal of the Israeli army, according to that despicable document, is to uphold universal humanitarian values. That's the purpose of the army, not to destroy the enemy, not to win, but to uphold so-called what he describes in his, based on his own perverse conception of morality.
Conceptia.
Yeah, right. The aim is to uphold this so-called universal code of humanitarian values,
even at the cost of casualties.
Not even specifically and deliberately by causing as many casualties as possible on our side, because that by so doing you are proving just how humanitarian and how ethically pure and untainted you are. Now you don't. This sounds perhaps like hyperbole what I'm saying right now, but
it isn't.
It isn't, and I'll tell you how I know, because former Chief of Staff and later Defense Minister Benny Gantz, one of the most moronic individuals one could even
that's an empty suit.
Mention when discussing Israeli politics and people in leadership positions. How such a person ever got past the rank of sergeant is truly
don't insult the sergeants.
A mystery.
They're the backbone of the army.
I'm not knocking sergeants. I myself was, and I suppose technically remain, a sergeant, so in the army. So I'm not knocking sergeants, but this man said initially he admitted to this in English originally in some interview, and I think later he also repeated it in Hebrew. But initially he was afraid. Apparently he was wary of admitting this in Hebrew, so he said it in some English interview. He said as follows: that on a certain occasion, he deliberately endangered the lives of I think Golani soldiers.
Golani.
Because of what he perceived as the ethical imperative of being concerned
Protecting
with
civilians.
what he describes as non-combatant civilians. I would question that definition and that entire concept. But he was willing, and openly said so. Not only was he willing, he was proud to admit to this, that he had willingly, deliberately endangered Israeli soldiers, Jewish soldiers, in order to protect our enemies.
Yeah, that had to do with essentially human shields, voluntary human shields that were protecting terrorists inside buildings. And that's when that statement came out. I have to tell you, and I've said this, it bears repeating. Several months ago, I was coming back from Malavamalka in Yemen Moshe, and a bus stopped and out poured basically young recruits, paratroopers, Tanchanim. And there must have been 40 or 50 of them that surrounded me. And they were all English speakers. And they asked me for a bracha, of course, which I gave happily. And then asked me for a word of advice because they had never been in combat before. And they were a little scared. So I said to them, all of them, I said, do all of you have the purity of arms, the little booklet? And of course, they all said yes.
And I said,
could I have them, please? The ethical. Yeah. Could I please have them? I said rather naively. And they didn't think anything. And they gave me a handful of them. And I said, what I'm going to do right now may save your life. I hope it does. And I walked right over to a trash can and dumped them all in the trash can. And I came back and I said, you are Jewish soldiers defending our homeland, our God-given homeland. Show the enemy no mercy. And remember, your only loyalty apart from Hashem, to Hashem, the God of Israel, is to your colleague, a comrade on either side of you. If you get stupid orders, you owe your loyalty to the man on either side of you, your Jewish brother. And they just stood there looking at me, dumbfounded. And I said, you understand what I just said? And slowly the heads nodded. And I said, Baruch Hashem, now go kill the enemy. So
I would strongly recommend to anyone serving in the army today to very demonstratively organize mass burnings or trashings of these documents. And they should announce that we refuse to follow anything written in this book, in this so-called ethical code.
I have. In every speech I give in Mechinas, military schools for young people who are just going into the army and everything else, I said, burn that bloody document the minute you get it, because it's corrupt and it's trafe. You cannot. It's an affront to our faith and our belief in our sacred mission here to carry out God's word as enunciated in Torah. You must get rid of that document.
Absolutely so. And by the way, it's impossible to defeat your enemy when acting in accordance with such an immoral and irrational set of statements.
Our code of ethics is in the Torah. If you want to know what a good campaign is, read the Sefer Yoshua. I mean, it's right there. Esther, Alei Shalom. She actually used to hand out copies of that Sefer wherever I was giving lectures and generals were present. She would actually hand them copies of Sefer Yoshua and advise them, if you want to know how to be a good Jewish general, read this. She said, there is one mistake that he made, but, we've been suffering ever since, and you should learn from that, not to make that mistake again. And, it was not funny. She was deadly serious about this. So that's the purity of arms. There's also been a lot of confusion over what's going on.
Jonathan, I'm sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you, but I wish to bring up something on the screen and show it to
Okay.
our viewers, share it with you and our viewers. Just give me one more moment. Okay, you should be able to see now on the screen. This was sent to me by Talmid, a student of mine. I'm very proud, I must add, that such a person of such caliber, considers himself to be my student, when in fact the truth is I've learnt quite a few things from him. If you can see this, this is an article that was printed in the
Yes.
Tablet magazine, written by Professor and Rabbi Jeremy or Yirmiyahu, England.
Wonderful man.
Printed, amazing individual, highly intelligent, intellectual, and thoroughly committed to Hashem and to the Torah and to the Jewish people. It was printed just recently, end of May, according to the Gregorian calendar this year. The name of the title of the article is "Live by the Law," in other words, the Torah, or "Die on the Cross."
Correct.
A brilliant title, and it's a very cleverly, wittily, and well-crafted article. It's absolutely essential reading. I recommend it to all. I will perhaps just quote a line or two from it. I haven't discussed, by the way, with Professor Rabbi England mentioning this in our conversation now, but I'm sure he won't mind too much. He says as follows. He explains how the basis of the warped, regressive, woke ideology is essentially Christianity. This, by the way, is also, what I'm saying now is also an answer to a certain individual who wrote to me,
correct,
decrying some of the things that I said in an earlier podcast with you, Jonathan, where I was making a similar point to this, but I think here it's made in an excellent. It's done so well that I will quote a few lines. Let's see if I can find the relevant lines. He writes here as follows, for example: Christianity no longer gets top billing in the Western marketplace of ideas, but its legacy is everywhere you look, no matter how secular the setting. He goes on to say, what would Jesus do if a Hamas fighter held a Gazan Arab child up as a shield while firing? Hard to say, for sure, but anyone who argues, I'm reading from the article, anyone who argues that a properly humane response is to die rather than to try to shoot around the child has ample basis in Christianity. The image of the crucifixion may mean many things, but part of what it means is that accepting corporeal defeat in this world can be a path to godlike virtue and spiritual victory in the world of tomorrow. You will not hear Jesus mentioned when Western leaders speak on how important it is that Israel adhere to international laws of war, but the concept of the innocent civilian enshrined in these laws grew practically out of wars fought within Christendom during the last several hundred years. I would just add that, without exception, those very same people who require that Israel adhere to what they refer to as international laws of war, which I believe don't really exist in essence.
They don't.
It's all very, very vague and subjective. And for instance, what is
it's contextual, as the Ivy League president said. It's all a matter of context.
As an Israeli professor of law said just a couple of nights ago on Channel 14 here in Israel, his name is Professor Elia something or other. I'm sorry, I can't remember his last name. If it's important, I can find it. He's actually researched this topic for the last 30 years. It should be pointed out, by the way, he's not religious. I don't even know if he's traditional. And up until this point in time, at least, and perhaps even now, he identifies as center-left. But he's not a fool, and he can see reality for what it is, and he knows his law, his international law, and what have you. And he said, for example, on the question of what is acceptable collateral damage, if you need to take out a certain enemy individual, and in so doing, you will kill 10 so-called, rightly or not rightly described non-combatants. Is that acceptable collateral damage? 10. Some say, he said that the range that he has found in international in journals of international law on this question range from 10 to 10,000. So you can pick any number you like and make it all up as you go along. So he concludes in this article, Professor Rabbi England, he says as follows: instead of bragging about the extra danger our soldiers experience for the sake of sparing enemy non-combatants, we should reject the premise that we Jews bear any responsibility for protecting the human shields employed by our enemy. And he ends on this note. He says, if our own unsurpassably subtle ethical tradition guides us to these policies, then it is our lingering ideological subjugation to the Western tradition that makes them seem scandalous. In other words, if we hold by values and notions rooted in the Torah, and they seem scandalous in the eyes of others, that's because we are somehow playing into that game of theirs where they make up the rules, and therefore what we claim or think is scandalous. Like the Jew among nations, Israel constantly struggles with its half-successful attempt to blend in with the crowd and pretend to be a member like any other. And it is time to put an end to this paralyzing charade. We did not stick to our law, that is to say the Torah, through 3,000 years of human civilization to continue national life as the perpetual defendant. It is our job to know that law, to teach what we know, and most of all, to live by it. That's what I'll quote for now. It's the entire article is highly recommended.
I might add that there has been a new book that's just been published by Magid, by Shlomo Brody, and it's entitled, I don't know if you can see it, Ethics of Our Fighters.
Yes, I see that.
Okay. This is the first book to have come out, to my knowledge, subsequent to the October 7th, dealing with the issue from a historical standpoint of the Jewish way of war. There are a lot of problems with the book, but I think it's a good start. People shouldn't read this book as if it's the definitive or even the most accurate evaluation or analysis of Jewish ethics in war. But I think it's a very good start for people to see what the general issues are and how they've been addressed over the years by our halachic scholars, by our rabbonim, and by our secular philosophers, Jewish secular philosophers. But as I said, this is just a beginning. I would read Jeremy's article in tablet first to get an accurate grounding. And then I would read this book, The Ethics of Our Fighters, just to understand how the issue has been hopelessly complicated and obscured, if you will, by people who are desperately trying to understand whether or not we have a unique view of ethics in war. So this book, Ethics in War by Shlomo Brody, is, I would say, just a discussion piece, because, as I said, there are some serious, serious problems in the book. But it's worth reading just to understand what the major issues
are. The major point that we all must internalize is actually very straightforward. It's necessary, of course, to flesh everything out, but the basic essential point, first and foremost, is to understand that the Torah has what to say about how one deals with one's enemies. The Torah, Judaism, which is a civilization that has existed for, if we wish to be precise, let us say 3,800 odd years, and a civilization which has produced the most voluminous and profound works in the realm of law and ethics, more than any other ancient or modern civilization. If one perhaps wishes just to look behind me, what viewers see right now, you see just a very small percentage of my own personal library, and I'm just one person with limited means and limited space for books, but I'm surrounded by thousands of volumes in my little Bet Midrash, my den, my office here. And that's because we are the people of the book. Everybody knows that. It's even written in the works of our enemies. In the Quran, it says that we are the people of the book.
Correct.
The Christian world will also not deny this. So the Jewish world, the Jewish theology, ideology, and statecraft have a clear view of how war is to be fought, and more particularly when dealing with people whose aim, their express aim, is to destroy you at any cost. And by the way, I would add that this is what I was trying to say before, I think I got sidetracked, that it's only with regards to Israel that the regressives insist on certain standards of conduct when it comes
Correct.
to war. But as for themselves, they are somehow miraculously exempt from all those very same imaginary laws. It's only the Jews who have to act by the Christian ideal of that individual on the cross, and that being a great victory somehow. But they, who are the offspring of people who accepted that image as their in central inspiring image, they are somehow never required to fight wars in that way.
Never.
For example, look at how the war with Japan in the Second World War was ended. Look at
Dresden.
Excuse me. Look
Dresden.
at the Allies fought Germany and Japan, just for example.
The philosophy is best, I think, articulated by a statement that was made during Vietnam. And that statement was, we had to destroy the village to save it. You'll never find that in Torah, that you have to commit a crime because of some higher value. We have a higher value. It's all articulated in the Torah. You don't have to make up some cynical statement, as they did during Vietnam, in which a general stated, well, we had to burn all these villages and destroy all of them to save them. It wasn't to burn or destroy these villages in order to deprive them from the enemy. It didn't say that. It was far more cynical. So we have to understand, as you just pointed out, these laws that they've made up out of whole cloth have been applied, to my knowledge, only in our case. Everyone else is given more or less a free pass. And we have to understand that as much as we try to adhere to these laws of the cross, as I call them, or as Jeremy called them, it doesn't do us any good. So why should we even try to ape them, or God forbid, adopt them as our own, as we have, unfortunately, in that purity of arms. And this is why I agree with you.
The very concept, by the way, it should be pointed out, the concept, which is you're translating from the Hebrew. In Hebrew, it's referred to, unfortunately, by these regressive retards as tohar neshek, which is purity of arms. The very concept, purity of arms, I suggest, does not exist in any other language. Have you ever heard of anyone in the Western world speak about the purity of arms? I've never heard such a thing.
The only thing I've heard is that we have to, for example, adhere to the Geneva or the Hague conventions on war. But the notion of purity
exactly
is so
it's wild-eyed, irrational, fanatical, regressive fervor to talk about purity of arms.
It's how do I say this? It's a contradiction in terms.
Essentially, it is not almost a contradiction in terms, because according to the Torah, there are wars that we are commanded to fight.
Those
and we are commanded to destroy our enemies in given situations. So to claim that using arms and going to war is always by definition a criminal act, which is essentially a derivative of that Christian outlook, is entirely untrue according to the Torah. That's entirely false. But of course, war by definition is not something that we wish to have to engage in ad infinitum.
Look, it's the difference between killing and murdering. You kill in war. I mean, unfortunately, but you murder in peacetime, where there is no war or an unjust.
I'm sure you would agree with the following statement, Jonathan. The U.S. military, the British military. I'm not going to even mention Russia or Iran or China, but let's talk about America. Let's talk about the UK. Let's talk about the New Zealand armed forces. Have any of these countries and their military establishments have they produced some such code of ethics?
No, I can tell you for a fact they haven't.
There's no such thing.
No,
because that's not the purpose. That's not the aim of an army. The army does not exist in order to promote some fanciful, regressive ethical code.
No, it's to defend the nation at all costs and in whatever way is appropriate to the circumstances. That's the purpose of an army.
Unless you're some kind of wild-eyed, again, some cross-bearing Christian or post-Christian, but you are nevertheless influenced by that cultural heritage and mindset, and then somehow you can conclude in your own mind that any form of warfare, by definition, is immoral.
Look, you have only to understand what happened in Vietnam, and even in Korea, for that matter, to understand that this whole notion of purity of arms is a fiction that was made up to be a straitjacket for the armies of Israel. That's why I agree totally with you. There must be a burning of this document. It's abhorrent. The minute this war is over, we have to.
What I find more galling and impossible to explain is the fact that I do not recall offhand, certainly not going back many years, maybe very recently, certain rabbis have said something about it, although I don't recall actually hearing or seeing such a thing. But perhaps because of our current situation, some rabbis have said something. But this is not a new document, as I pointed out. It's been around for approximately 30 years, 35 years. Mm-hmm. I do not recall any rabbi of any stripe taking that document to task and
they'd lose their
and defining it as an abomination and as being in complete contravention of everything the Torah stands for.
Well, when I give lectures at mechinas, the pre-military academies, I always end on this note that the best way of safeguarding your life in combat is to forget everything you read or were indoctrinated with this abomination.
And
And there are
the only way to destroy your people's enemies is to do that.
I mean, I have on several occasions actually burned a copy of it, and it was deadly quiet when I did that. And a lot of the kids came up to me later and thanked me for doing it. They said they couldn't do it, but they thanked me for doing it. And I'll continue to do it. I don't care.